Chairman and members of the committee. House Bill 7199 would ban the use, sale, and possession of high-capacity magazines, meaning those that can accept greater than 10 rounds of ammunition. And I want to share a very brief story to help explain why I think this legislation is important. A few weeks ago, I was at a state legislative conference out in Denver, Colorado, and it was really interesting. It was going great until something sadly familiar happened. We were in the middle of a panel, and a conference staffer took the mic and asked if all of the Michigan legislators could gather in an adjoining room. So they got up and left, and apparently were briefed on a tragedy that had just struck their state, a mass shooting in Kalamazoo. And later that evening, some of the Michigan representatives got up on the stage to offer some prayers for the victims, their constituents. I remember how helpless they looked on the stage, and that really struck me. But what was most heartbreaking to me was realizing that this exact set of circumstances had played out at each of the 3 conferences that I have attended since my election a year and a half ago. That's when it really hit me. We cannot go a weekend in this country without a mass shooting happening in one of our states. I know that none of us want to be at a conference someday in the future and have a staffer take the mic and ask all the Rhode Island legislators to join them in the hall for a briefing. And I want to make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can to protect ourselves from that possibility. I believe that we need to be thinking holistically about how to reduce gun violence in this country. It's not all about the weapons used, but I also know that there's a very clear pattern that we can see in nearly every major mass shooting in recent history, and that is the utilization of high-capacity magazines to shoot as many civilians as possible, as quickly as possible, before having to reload. That's the reality. I don't think it's hyperbole to say that these magazines are often what puts the mass in mass shooting. I'm not claiming at all that this legislation to prohibit these specific magazines would end gun violence on its own forever. But I think it can and should be one important step in reducing the scale of these possible tragedies. The Supreme Court has affirmed the principle of reasonable regulation of gun ownership. To me, joining our neighbors, Massachusetts and Connecticut, in limiting the mass murderer's accessory of choice seems like a very reasonable way of protecting our communities without infringing on anyone's constitutional rights. And that's why I appreciate your consideration of this legislation.
Thank you, Representative Regenberg. Vice Chair Costa.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Representative. This is probably the second or third time that I have heard this piece of legislation. And I understand what you want to do, and nobody wants to see anybody hurt. I have a really big problem with this bill. The problem is it would make over 300,000 people in the state of Rhode Island a felon as soon as this bill is passed. A lot of people here that are here today, and we've got close to 400 people here, over 300, are pro-Second Amendment. We're hunters. We go to the range. We have hobbies. I have magazines with 10 rounds, possibly more. My firearms are locked up. This would affect me, the law-abiding citizen that wants to go to the range, that wants to go shoot, and this is what we do. Upon passage of this bill, almost everybody out in that lobby would be arrested. We're felons. So I would really, really love to work with you on this legislation, and I honestly and truly, I think we should work together. There's a lot of legislation coming forward that we can work together with, because you have to realize we're not the enemy. We want to make sure that everybody's protected. We want to make sure that there's no child ever hurt again without taking away our rights. So I would love to sit with you and have a conversation with you and work together to get some legislation that would help everybody. But this wouldn't help everybody. This would only hurt us.
Representative Costa, I would love to work with you on things, and I love our conversations, our occasional tussles over policy. They always are productive, I think. And I appreciate what you're saying. Just quickly to clarify, the legislation, once it goes into effect, it wouldn't be immediately criminalizing anyone. It sets a period of time in which everyone has the opportunity to responsibly get rid of those specific magazines. They can sell them. It sets a number of different ways that they can abide by the rule, but there's a long period of time when people can figure that out before
Well, I
anything
can't
goes
find in
into effect.
here unless you can point it to me, because it does say this act would take effect upon passage.
And so there's I don't have it in front of me, so I can't state the page number or line, but there's a section where it describes the process.
Thank you.
It describes the period of time and the different ways that people can comply with it. Thank you.
And again, we can definitely work together.
Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. Thank you, Rep.
Thank you. Any other questions for, yes, Representative Almeida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's not for you, Aaron. Don't worry about that. Rep, you can see my name on this bill. You know, I talked about it for a few times. But the one thing that comes up all the time is, how many rounds do you need to kill a deer? That's what they're going to ask. And it only takes 2 rounds to kill a human being. And if we're talking high-powered, Aaron represents an area that's what I call first cousin to yours truly's neighborhood. And a round can go to a wall, it can go to wherever. So that's really the purpose of the social purpose of this particular bill. How many rounds you need to kill a deer? And then that's what they want to know.
Yes, Representative Costa, you want to respond to that?
I would. Thank you. Representative Almeida, I don't hunt. I go to the range. That's my hobby. I couldn't kill a deer with 1 bullet, never mind 10. I couldn't kill any kind of animal, but I have no problems with anybody that wants to hunt. Thank you.
And sorry, really, just briefly, sorry that I didn't have it in front of me, but it's page 3, line 27, where they have 120 days to remove the capacity, and then it sets a number of different options. Thanks.
Representative Canario?
Chairman, just a quick question, Rep. What made you come up with the number 10 in terms of rounds? Why is that the magic number? Why wasn't it 15? Why wasn't it 5? Why wasn't it 12? I'm just curious as to why 10 is what you went with.
There might be some folks coming after me who could talk to that to greater detail. I think you need to choose a line somewhere, and I guess from my perspective, 10 seems like a pretty reasonable limit where you can have 10 shots to do all the different things, legal, great things that folks like to do with weapons. But beyond that, again, it's what does one need more than 10 to do? It seems like the thing that you really need more than 10 to do is to go to a public place and start shooting.
Again, I was just curious as to how that number came up, because as we see whenever there's any type of mass casualty, as we saw what happened in Boston, they use homemade devices as well. And from what I understand, it's quite easy to make, as I guess you would call them, large capacity holders for a gun, on the street. So again, my concern is limiting law-abiding people while still letting the people on the street that have the capability to make as many as they want. You know what I'm trying to say? So I just have that concern in terms of high capacity. What is considered high capacity, and what made you come up with the number 10? And you answered that. Thank you.
Sure, and I appreciate that. I think when you look at a number of the mass shootings that have happened in the last few years, in a large degree of those, it seems like the folks who did them, they used what was at hand. The killer in the Newtown tragedy, he used what was at hand. It was what was nearby, what was easy. And so I think we want to be making it as hard as possible for folks like that to get their hands on these sorts of killing machines.
Just ask you a question. You may not have the answer to it, but in the case of like the mass shootings, were those folks actually licensed concealed carry holders?
I think there are people coming after who could who have more
I didn't
details
know
on that.
if you knew the answer to that. Thank you.
But this bill doesn't have anything to do with licensed carry.
Representative Filippi.
Thank you, Chairman. Representative Almeida, I don't know that hunting is even relevant to this conversation. And I would just like to ask the sponsor a question. Is the intent of this bill just to apply to long rifles, or do you intend this to apply to handguns as well? Because my reading of this, it affects a large amount of handguns. And I don't know if that's your intent, or is it just for long rifles that you're focused on?
The intent is to focus on any high-capacity magazines.
Any further questions for the sponsor? Representative Almeida.
You know, I got to make a statement. Rep. Filippi, I hear you. You're absolutely right. But the word 10 is in it. The word multiple is here. And the gun's just not going to stay in the street or out in the wilderness somewhere. The fact is that what this good rep is trying to do, yeah, my name is on it, but what this good rep is trying to do is control the amount of rounds that's out in the street. That's what he's trying to do. Representative Canario just mentioned, and I'm putting words in his mouth, you know, why 10, 12, whatever it may be. But if you look at the history of a sidearm for a peace officer, when we're going for, well, when I started, it was a 38. If you look way back in history, I think it was a 32. Started in New York. So it went from 5 to 6 to a 9mm with multiple rounds. The fact is, when does it stop? How does it stop? He's bringing up a conversation of when, because we don't know where a person's going to go with that weapon, be it a revolver, a 9mm, or some huge automatic weapon. So you're right. It may not be geared towards Bambi, but it's surely going to be geared towards some poor kid in the street somewhere, and that's what he's trying to do.
Certainly not. And I was just expressing my opinion that I reject the argument that the Second Amendment is for hunting only. And I find many times in these debates that that's the false frame that's advanced. And I do reject that, and I just wanted to state that on the record in response to your prior comment.
And I truly respect your legal view on it. But sometimes up here in this building, we forget about the morality of what we're trying to do. And that's part of the morality of what we're trying to do.
I don't question anyone's morality before this committee today.
Beg pardon?
I think everyone is here for moral purposes. I don't agree with their policy that they're advancing, but I don't question the morality or their motivations.
Well, I won't take on your legal brief back and forth, but I hear what you're saying.
Thank you, Representative.